Hello there, and welcome. This is kind of a bit of a test, really. I've done a few photo walks as part of On the Streets, and during those photo walks, I've had one or two people ask me how I process my images. So we've just recently finished a photo walk around Liverpool over the weekend, which saw us enter different places of Liverpool that I've not been before. But one of the images I'd like to kind of process for you and just show you how I go about it is this image I took almost right at the very beginning of the walk, and it's in Liverpool Lime Street. So I'm going to take this image and I'm going to convert it using Lightroom to process, and that's what I do majority of my processing in. So if I just open this up so you can see the full image, and that's essentially out of the camera, taken into imported into Lightrooms, and from here I'll edit from this point onwards. When I do import, I normally do a basic preset that I have set automatically, and it's applied to every single image that I have, but it's just a little bit of sharpening, etc. along those lines. So that's always the base position I start with. So now I'm going to go into the develop module within Lightrooms, and I'm just going to do a few little things, a few little tweaks to convert it into black and white, and then I'll start developing the image from there. And the first thing I notice is that the main characters of interest are these three characters here. So they're the individuals I want to really try and make the most out of. And within street photography, we've got this concept of layers. So as you look through the image, there's a few other secondary or tertiary characters that I kind of want you to see, but not draw too much attention to. And the first pair is this couple here, who are staring intently at one another behind our main characters. And then if we look further into the scene, we've got the woman on the mobile phone here. We've got the gentleman yawning at the back here, and also the strange character down here. All of those characters, individuals, I'd like to try and bring into the image some way while still maintaining interest on these three characters. So the first thing I'm going to do is sort of crop it, essentially get the balance and the crop of the image as I would like it. So I know a majority of people would say what you get in the camera is what you take. I'm not adverse to playing around and changing to some degree. So I'm just going to straighten initially, and then just going to keep the dimensions we've got. So I'm just going to reduce the size just to try and bring it in. So I've got the main characters of interest in there while trying to get rid of some of the other distractions. So the distractions are I'm wanting to remove the wheel and bag here, the bit of the sign up here, and the sign here that's come in, which I don't want involved in there. I'm happy with the way he's there, and the way I've cropped it now. If you have a look at the grid I've got here, the way they're all looking follows this diagonal line. So we've got this diagonal going through them, and just to try and bring that together, follow that through her eye down to her wrist and then back up into where they are. So hopefully we'll end up circling around those particular people from a composition point of view. So what I'm going to do is just accept that. Saying that I'm just a little conscious that I'm cutting off this. So I'm going to extend out here a little bit to bring that in, but also bring in the top. So just observing some of the extra corners, and I'll give him a little bit more headroom, so to speak. So let's take that up a tad, and let's say done. Now we can always, as we go through the processing, we can always change that again as we go through and as we start the process to see what comes across with more power. So the next thing I would generally do is go into my mono conversion. The reason I want to convert this to mono is although we've got a relatively simple tone, predominantly blues, with a little bit of oranges, there are some big distractors in there in the pink of the hat, the red of the sign, and a few other bits of redness and greens that come out that I don't really want to dominate the scene. So I'm going to convert it into mono, and that will give me a lot more latitude in my processing as well. The way I would normally process into mono was to go into some presets I've defined previously, which you can do in Lightrooms. Once you've come across a formula you like, you can set up a preset. So these I have set up in the background to give me a particular look and feel for my monochrome black and white work. So I'm just going to select this one here, and that essentially converts us to a black and white image. It also applies a few base settings in the highlight shadows, whites and blacks, and also if we scroll down, it plays around with the color balance a little to allow us to emphasize certain colors in the black and white tones that it would subsequently give. I'll come back to these in a little bit, but let's scroll up and have a look at where we are with the image so far. If you haven't noticed, we've got, if you click on the little arrow there, it shows you all the areas that are blocked out, where we've got no details in the blacks. There's quite a bit there. I'm not averse to letting areas of the image black out. I quite like a high contrast image, but I'm just going to try and recover a little bit of that by backing this off a little bit. It's on -29 at the moment. I'm going to come back a little, a tad, just to give us a little bit more detail in the black areas. Not too much, just enough so we've got a little bit more detail, but we've still got those deep blacks in the image, in the crevices and where the shadows would be. So that's essentially, I think I'm good there. Got no white areas burning out at the moment. I just want to try and bring a little bit more into the white, but just back it off when it starts to clip. So that's roughly where I'd like the image to be. There's a bit more detail. I'd like to try and eke out the individual faces, and if this stands at the moment, it's pretty evenly lit across the scene, so the floor's just as dominant as the faces. So what I'm going to do is essentially darken down the background whilst trying to keep these relatively light. So I'm going to use the Radial Filter, and I'm going to position it when it responds to over the faces, over the bits of the image that I'm interested in. If you click on the show, it'll show you where's being affected, and I'm going to invert that at the moment so I can see where it's red, it will start to affect the image. So I just want to move it around and tweak it a little, just so I've got the best setting for me. You can use the brush and erase to pull out little bits and pieces if you want, but I'm not going to do that here. I'm just going to accept that as it is. So I'm going to take that back. I'm just going to tweak the exposure for the area. So if I just, for the moment, just pull it down, that's essentially the effect it's having, but I want to apply it subtly. So around, there we go, around that area, I think I'm happy with. And what I'm going to do is say OK to that. So that's darkened all the area. The floor is all toned down, not as strong as it once was, yet the faces still remain. However, I want to bring out those a little bit further. So I'm going to add the Radial Filter again. It's one of my favorite tools in Lightrooms, especially for doing this dodge and burning of the images. And now I want to lighten the face. Just going to back that off a little bit, and I'm going to add a little bit more clarity in there just to give a little bit more definition, and I'm going to duplicate that and move it on to the lady's face here, the mother, and I'm going to duplicate it again and take it down to the child, and then that, just rotate it a tad, and then that gives us those three characters all lit up. Now, just looking at the secondary characters I was interested in, because of the vignetting I've put, these two are relatively safe. I quite like the brightness they've got there. The lady on the phone's darkened down quite a bit, so I might try and recover her a little bit more. Not so bothered with the yawning man now. He's there. You won't draw attention to him. The lady here is dropping out a little bit more, which I'm all right with. And I quite like the way this guy is still visible. I'm going to lighten him up a little bit more. So I'm going to copy this again, copy that and duplicate that, and I'm going to move that over here, shrink it down. So I'm just affecting the guy here. I'm going to lighten this one a good bit. There, so it comes out, but now I'm going to use this range mask just so I affect the lighter areas rather than the darker and shaded areas, so we retain the blacks surrounding him and just bring out the whites and the highlights a little bit more. So I think that's close to what I'm after. So I'll say done to that one and just have a quick look around the image. And I'm quite happy with my dodging and burning that I've applied there. Just going to look at the tone curve a little bit to see whether I want to add a little bit more punch into the darks and lights. So the way I generally do that is just pop in a little S curve just to bring down the blacks a little. So, and this is, I do this by sight generally to see how it does, and a little bit in the highlights. Not too much. If you notice we're clipping out, see where we're clipping out, and I'll back off the whites just a tad to bring that detail back in again. And there I'm happy with the way that comes across. I'm just going to scroll down a little bit further. Now, one of the areas I like to play with is depending on the colours in the image, depends on how dark or light or similar tones they would appear. So we can change the particular tones and lighten or darken particular areas. So if I wanted to darken the faces or the colour tone for the faces, which is generally your reds and oranges, if I highlight the face and drag down a little bit, it will tone your oranges and the reds down a little bit. We're just bringing those back a little bit. And the same is true of other colours. So his jeans and the chairs were blue. If I click on these, and we can see the blue areas and the jeans darkening down as I play with that to reduce the darkness or the intensity of those particular tones. And let's see what the floor does. See if we can. So there's an element of green in the floor. Let's see if we can darken that down a bit, just to tone it down a fraction. So still trying looking at these. Our three characters are main ones. I've just noticed this particular bag down here that's I'm finding a little bit distracting, so we'll try and tone that down a little bit as well. So let's go to the adjustment brush here. I'm going to select the brush. I'm just going to pop the auto mask on here to help me try and select just the bag itself. So let's just click that on so we can see where it's affecting. Just go around, and then I just want to make sure I don't get the edge of the chairs. If not, it looks a little weird. Just remove where it's selected the chair there, and a little bit the back. And if I get to remove that, I just want to darken it down a little. So if I pull the exposure just down a little bit so it's not as intense as it was before, and remove the. So it's still white, it's still there, but it's not as intense as it was. In fact, let's see if we can pull it down a little bit further. There we go. So the lightest areas off our image are now the faces. So I'm going to say done to that and happy. I'm just going to scroll down and make sure that my sharpening, etc., is as I want it. I think I've gone the setting preset I had. It's gone a little bit too heavy-handed. Back that off a little bit. Always like to add a bit of mask, so not masking, not sharpening every single area. If you press the Alt, is it the Alt? Yeah, it shows you where you're sharpening and where the sharpen's been affected. So there's a majority of the faces, but I'm not so bothered about the background, etc. And then just check a little bit noise reduction. With it being mono, I always boost the color noise reduction to the max, and that's essentially that image as far as I want to go there. So the other little tip we've got here is when you import, depending on your camera, they may have specific modes, etc. in your camera that you could potentially exploit. It comes in with Adobe standard in my preset, so I'm just going to see whether there's another option that comes with the camera that gives us a slightly different boost to the image to see whether it gives me a better feel. So this is just seeing what we've got there, just testing, and just to see if there's one that gives me an overall vivid what a look that I like a little bit more. And this camera vivid one that comes with the Olympus, I quite like that one, so I'm going to go with that. Just going to check the blacks again, make sure there's not too much blacked out, and I'm happy with that. So that is essentially the processing in Lightroom's that I would do, and I'm quite happy with the way the images turned out there. However, there are a few other bits and pieces we can do, such as take it into Silver FX to see whether there's anything we can add in that way, or try and pull out a little bit more detail and give it a little bit more grit and grunt. So I'm just going to try something here, which is to reduce all the highlights. I may take it back up. I'm going to increase the shadows a little bit, and then, so if you notice, we start to get almost a HDR type effect going on. Then let me back off the shadows. Let's tone the shadows down a little bit. Get a lot more detail in the facial expressions and the cheeks, but I'm just going to bring the highlights down, back off the effect a little bit. And there we go. I think I'm going to finish with that one, and that's going to be that image. Sort of checking the times, I imagine, of when the next train's about to arrive, so she can go off to the concert that she's about to have, I would imagine. So let's finish with that one, and that's the processing, how I generally convert images to black and white using Lightroom's. Sometimes, as mentioned before, I will use Silver FX, and it's very unlikely that I'll jump into Photoshop most of the time. In fact, the majority of the time, your images don't really need the full Photoshop toolset. Lightroom's is more than enough. So thank you, and see you again.